Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today, we're diving into the eerie and atmospheric world of filmmaker Oz Perkins. Known for his unique and haunting style, Perkins has carved out a distinctive space in modern horror cinema. From slow-burn psychological horror to chilling supernatural tales, his films aren't just scary, they are deeply unsettling in a way that lingers long after the credits roll. We are going to take a look at his filmography, exploring the themes, visuals, and storytelling techniques that makes his work so memorable. But what makes Oz Perkins great, yet so underrated? If you're a fan of slow burn, atmospheric horror, or films that get under your skin with psychological depth, you'll probably come across his work. Oz Perkins is often considered underrated in the modern horror genre due to several factors that distinguish his work but may also contribute to his relatively low-profile status compared to the more mainstream horror directors. But why isn't he as mainstream as some of his horror contemporaries? Let's break it down. First off, Perkins' storytelling style is all about subtlety and atmosphere. His films are slow burners, they take their time to build tension. There are no quick jump scares or fast-paced chases here. Instead, he lets the fear creep in gradually, using silence, long lingering shots, and minimalistic sound design to build dread. This approach is rewarding for those of us who appreciate that kind of slow, psychological build-up, but for viewers expecting the more adrenaline-fueled horror, it can be a bit too slow. His focus on atmosphere over action might turn off some mainstream audiences who are looking for something more immediate or conventional, but if you are in it for the vibe, Perkins nails it every time. Perkins is also known for adding psychological depth to his stories. His films aren't just about external threats, but dive deep into internal fears, trauma, memory, and identity. They really make you think. There is this complexity that requires you to engage emotionally and intellectually. His films don't give you all the answers on a silver platter. And speaking of answers, ambiguity is a big part of his style. You're often left with more questions than answers by the time of credits roll. This can be both a blessing and a curse. If you love films that leave room for interpretation, his work is like a goldmine. But if you prefer clear resolutions, you might find it a bit frustrating. Now, let's talk about unconventional horror. Perkins doesn't rely on gore or traditional supernatural horror to scare you. Instead, he taps into the horror of the mind, internal struggles, repressed memories, and existential dread. This minimalist approach is super effective for viewers who like their horror more cerebral, but it might not hit home for fans of more graphic or traditional scares. His films are also character-driven in a big way. Instead of focusing on external horror elements, the real terror comes from the emotional and psychological journeys of his characters. In a lot of ways, his films play more like psychological dramas with horror undertones, which might not resonate with everyone expecting full total horror. Perkins' visual style is another thing that sets him apart. His films are meticulously shot with a gothic, almost art house aesthetic that draws on influences from German expressionism and classic horror cinema. The lighting is moody, the shots are carefully composed, and there is this stark, haunting quality to his visuals. It's beautiful to watch, but it can feel slow or uneventful for viewers expecting more dynamic, fast-paced storytelling. On the sound design side, Perkins tends to be very restrained. Instead of aggressive soundtracks or loud effects, he uses subtle noises to create tension. The quiet moments in his films are as just powerful as the louder ones, but again, this style is very different from in-your-face sound design you'll find in more mainstream horror. Because of all this, Perkins' films tend to have more of a niche appeal. They are perfect for fans of art house cinema, psychological horror, or anyone who loves films that challenge traditional genre conventions. But for mainstream audiences, his work can feel a bit too slow, too ambiguous, or too artsy. Even though he gets a lot of critical acclaim, it doesn't always translate into box office hits or massive popularity. You'll see his films talked about in more academic or cinephile circles rather than dominating the mainstream conversation like some other directors. Another reason why Perkins might fly under the radar is his limited output. He doesn't churn out films as frequently as some other directors, so he doesn't stay in the public eye as consistently. When you combine that with the fact that his films cater to a more niche audience, it makes sense why his name might not be as well known as, say, Ari Aster or Jordan Peele. One thing I have to mention is Perkins' use of symbolism, especially when it comes to devil and satanic imagery. But unlike some films that use these symbols just for shock value, Perkins goes deeper. In his films, these symbols often represent internal struggles, things like loneliness, trauma, or temptation of power. It's less about the external evil and more about what's lurking inside his characters, which makes his film rich in metaphor and meaning. Now, let's take a step into Oz Perkins' filmography and discuss what makes them special. The Blackcoat's Daughter. One of the most striking things about The Blackcoat's Daughter is its non-linear storytelling. The film follows three main characters, Cat, Rose, and Jan, who at first seems like their stories are completely unrelated. But as the film progresses, we start to see how these narratives are cleverly woven together. This fragmented approach mirrors the psychological state of the characters, especially Cat, played by Kiernan Shipka. Her reality becomes more and more blurred, and that's exactly how we as viewers feel too. Perkins builds tension slowly, letting us piece together the connections ourselves, and the way he withholds key information keeps us on edge the entire time. The pacing is deliberately slow, giving us plenty of time to sink into the eerie, cold atmosphere of the boarding school. It's not about the big jumps or thrills here, but that unsettling, creeping tension that makes us feel like something is always just out of reach. At its core, The Blackcoat's Daughter is all about isolation, both physical and emotional. The film takes place at an almost deserted boarding school during winter break. The school's vast, empty hallways become a metaphor for the characters' emotional states, cold, abandoned, and haunted by something they can't quite understand. Cat is the embodiment of this isolation. She is withdrawn and uneasy, struggling with a sense of foreboding that she can't put into words. The distance between her and the other characters reflects the emotional detachment she is experiencing. Meanwhile, Rose is dealing with her own isolation, but in a different way. She is consumed by fear, specifically fear of an unplanned pregnancy. And there is John, the mysterious third character. Her isolation is tied to trauma, which slowly reveals itself as the film progresses. Through these three characters, Perkins explores different kinds of alienation, whether it's the alienation of youth, guilt, or trauma. And in the end, all this isolation leads them down dark and terrifying paths. Another layer of this film is the religious symbolism that runs throughout. There are themes of possession, fate, and evil, but instead of taking a more traditional supernatural road, Perkins keeps it deeply psychological. Cat's growing fear and anxiety are intertwined with visions of the devil and this overwhelming sense that something terrible is destined to happen. What's really interesting is that the evil in this film isn't some external monster or force. It comes from within. It's tied to trauma and isolation, and that's what makes it so chilling. Cat's descent into madness feels quiet and ritualistic, almost like it's inevitable. The film also touches on the role of fate in dealing with trauma and loneliness. Cat's longing for connection, whether it's with other people or something more sinister, is a central part of her character. This blurring of the lines between victim and perpetrator, sanity and madness, is a recurring theme in Perkins' work and is fully on display here. Let's talk about the cinematic techniques that Perkins uses to create this intense atmosphere of dread. The cinematography done by Julie Kirkwood uses cold, muted tones to amplify the feeling of desolation. You'll notice a lot of wide shots that emphasize the emptiness of the school, really heightening how alone the characters are. On the other hand, Perkins uses close-ups sparingly, but with purpose, focusing on the characters' faces to capture their inner turmoil. This contrast between wide, empty spaces and tight, intimate shots really builds the tension. Then there is the editing, which plays a big role in making the narrative feel dreamlike and disorienting. By cutting between different timelines and perspectives, Perkins keeps us constantly questioning what's real and what's imagined. And we can't forget the sound design and score, composed by Perkins' brother Oz Perkins. The music is minimalistic and haunting, blending perfectly with the ambient sounds of the school. Sometimes it's the silence that really gets under your skin, making every crack or whisper feel like a threat. Finally, one of the reasons The Blackcoat's Daughter sticks with you long after it's over is because of how many questions it leaves unanswered. Perkins doesn't feel the need to explain every detail, which adds to the lingering sense of dread. Is Cat truly possessed, or is she just driven mad by her grief and isolation? What exactly the evil that seems to be haunting the school? These are the kinds of questions that are left hanging, and that's part of the film's power. It invites you to think, to interpret, and let that unsettling feeling linger. Perkins doesn't offer easy answers, but that's what makes this film so compelling. The unanswered questions, the ambiguity of Kate's fate, the nature of evil that haunts the boarding school are not gaps in the story, but instead they are what make the fear so real. The horror here is not just in what we see, but in what we don't understand, in the gaps between reality and madness, victim and villain. Ultimately, The Blackcoat's Daughter is a meditation on isolation, trauma, and terrifying unknown. It's a film that invites us to confront our own fears, and in doing so, it leaves us with that one chilling thought. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what we can see, but what we can't explain. I am the pretty thing that lives in the house. Oz Perkins' I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House isn't your typical haunted house film. Released in 2016, it's a slow, atmospheric exploration of fear, memory, and inevitable passage of time. The film is less about jump scares and more about the eerie, quiet, the creeping disintegration of his protagonist's mind. In this analysis, we'll explore how Perkins uses minimalism, narrative structure, and visual symbolism to craft a haunting experience that stays with you long after the credits roll. At its core, the film tells a deceptively simple story. A young nurse, Lily, moves into a remote New England home to care for an elderly author, Iris Bloom. The house feels timeless, untouched by the outside world, and soon Lily begins to suspect it's haunted by the ghost of Polly, a character from Iris' most famous novel, but Polly might not be entirely fictional. Perkins doesn't rely on complex twists or rapid pacing. Instead, the film unfolds slowly, almost like a dream, one that grows increasingly unsettling. The dialogue is sparse, and the pacing is intentionally languid, allowing the atmosphere to be the true star of the film. Lily's poetic, detached narration guides us through the story, and from the very beginning, she forewarns her own fate. The minimalism heightens the tension. Perkins shows us that less is more, making every silence, every glance down an empty hallway feel loaded with significance. The result? A growing sense of dread as we watch Lily move inexorably towards her doom. In this film, the house is more than just a setting, it's a repository of memories, both real and imagined. Polly's ghost isn't just haunting presence. She is the manifestation of a past that refuses to be forgotten. The walls hold these memories, and they creep into Lily's reality. Lily, young and naive, is haunted by more than just a ghost. She represents a fear of mortality, completely unprepared for the confrontation with death that the house symbolizes. In contrast, Iris Bloom, the elderly horror author, being closer to death, she has become a victim of her own stories, her life now indistinguishable from the fiction she created. The title itself, I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, is a reflection on Lily's fading sense of self. As the film progresses, Lily becomes more of a ghost than the actual spirit that haunts the house. Perkins is asking us to consider, is life itself just a collection of memories destined to fade like ghosts? Perkins uses both visual and sound design masterfully to build the oppressive atmosphere. The cinematography, handled by Julie Kirkwood, is cold and muted, with static, lingering shots that make the house feel like a character in its own right, a decaying place trapped in time. The slow pans through the empty hallways feels like a moving through a forgotten world. The sound design plays an equally important role. Silence is used as a weapon in this film, with every crack and whisper amplified to an unsettling degree. Elvis Perkins' score blends with the ambient sounds of the house, heightening the tension. You feel the isolation, the creeping dread in every quiet moment. Lily serves as an unreliable narrator, which is crucial to the film's tension. Her fear, her confusion, makes it hard for us to discern what's real and what's imagined. Is Polly truly a ghost? Or is Lily slowly losing her mind in the isolation of the house? The ambiguity is the key. Perkins leaves so much up to interpretation, forcing us to sit in the unease of the unexplained. Even the film's ending offers no easy answers. Lily's fate is sealed, but whether it was the result of the supernatural forces or her own unrevealing mind is left unclear. This lack of resolution makes the film all the more haunting. At first glance, I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House fits the mold of a classic ghost story. An old house, a tragic past, a haunting presence. But Perkins subverts these tropes, focusing instead of the psychological impact of the haunting. The ghost of Polly isn't just a specter, she is the embodiment of the past, of trauma that refuses to fade. Lily, the pretty thing, is fragile, innocent, and ultimately doomed. Perkins' symbolism suggests that we are all pretty things, too delicate to face the weight of memory and mortality. The house becomes a metaphor for our own lives, places where the past and present blend, and where we can never fully escape what's come before. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House challenges traditional horror conventions. It's a slow, meditative film about fear, memory, and death, a ghost story that operates at a deeper psychological level. Oz Perkins uses atmosphere, minimalism, and ambiguity to create a haunting film that lingers in the mind. It's a story not just about a haunted house, but about the ghosts that live within all of us. Gretel and Hansel. Oz Perkins' Gretel and Hansel, released in 2020, is not just a reimagining of the classic Brothers Grimm fairy tale. It's a visually stunning exploration of power, maturity, and autonomy. We're diving deep into the film's thematic richness, symbolic imagery, and how Perkins takes a familiar story and turns into something truly unsettling, resonating with us on both psychological and emotional levels. While we all know the story of Hansel and Gretel, Perkins shifts the focus to Gretel, transforming the narrative into a coming-of-age tale about independence. Gretel isn't just a passive character following her brother into the woods. She is a young woman, navigating her own path in an unforgiving world. Instead of simply trying to survive, Gretel is faced with choices that will determine her future and ultimately her own potential for good or evil. By centering the story on her, Perkins explores themes of agency and the often dark, difficult journey from adolescence to adulthood. The witch, portrayed by Alice Cridge, is far more than the traditional villain we expect. Instead, Perkins uses the witch as a symbol of female power, autonomy, and the dangerous allure of control. Her relationship with Gretel feels almost like that of a mentor, offering not just the magical abilities, but the temptation of independence and freedom. The witch's house, traditionally depicted as a sugary trap, is transformed into a complex space where Gretel must confront her desires, fears, and the possibilities of what she could become. It's both a prison and a sanctuary, representing the dual nature of power, nurturing yet potentially destructive. One of the standout aspects of Gretel and Hansel is its stunning visual design. Every shot is meticulously crafted, borrowing elements from German Expressionism and Gothic art, creating a world that feels like a dark, twisted fairy tale. Perkins uses light and shadow to emphasize the film's themes of duality, while Galo Olivares' cinematography immerses us in an eerie, dreamlike atmosphere. The production design mirrors the characters' emotional states. The decay and luxury of the witch's house symbolizes the fine line between transformation and destruction. The sound design, too, plays a vital role, blending natural and ambient sounds with an unsettling, minimalistic score to heighten the tension without relying on jump scares. At its heart, Gretel and Hansel is a coming-of-age story steeped in darkness. Gretel's journey is about confronting the darker sides of maturity, the temptation of power, the struggle for autonomy, and the inevitable loss of innocence. Her relationship with her younger brother, Hansel, lightens the tension between sibling loyalty and individual growth. Her final decision to separate from Hansel isn't just a physical act, but a symbolic one, an acceptance of her own path towards adulthood, even at the cost of leaving her childhood behind. It's a poignant reflection of how growing up means embracing complexity, autonomy, and sometimes power. Gretel and Hansel is a fairy tale steeped in folklore and myth, but Perkins doesn't use these elements merely as storytelling devices. Instead, he uses folklore to explore deeper psychological themes. The language and visuals of the film feel timeless, reflecting the universality of its themes. Triangles, a recurring motif, symbolize the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, connecting the characters' journeys to an ancient myth. Perkins subverts the traditional fairy tale by blurring the roles of victim and villain, and by replacing moral absolutes with more nuanced, ambiguous truths. In the end, Gretel and Hansel is more than just a horror film. It is a dark, meditative exploration of autonomy, the allure of power, and the inevitable loss of innocence. Oz Perkins takes a familiar story and breathes new life into it, turning it into a visually stunning, psychologically rich experience. It's a tale of transformation, one that lingers with us long after the final frame fades. Longlegs. And finally, let's talk about Oz Perkins' latest horror thriller, Longlegs. A film where horror doesn't rely on jump scares or grotesque monsters, but instead comes from a creeping sense of dread, that builds with every scene. Prepare for a journey into occult secrets, psychological tension, and disturbing revelations. Let's explore what makes Longlegs one of the most chilling films of the year. Imagine a movie doesn't shock you with sudden frights, but instead wraps you in a tightening grip of unease, slowly but surely. That's the core of Oz Perkins' Longlegs. The film takes its time, pulling viewers into a dark world filled with tension, occult mysteries, and a sinister atmosphere. It tells the story of an FBI agent, played by Maika Monroe, on the trail of a brutal serial killer portrayed by Nicolas Cage. However, Longlegs is far more than just a crime thriller. It explores occult elements, dramatic backstories, and psychological depth that elevate the horror far beyond the ordinary. Films like Zodiac and Prisoners come to mind when thinking of Longlegs, but with an added supernatural twist. The slow-burn tension mixes real-world dread with mythological horror, making this film stand out in a genre that often relies on simpler shocks. Oz Perkins has built his reputation on meticulously crafted atmospheres, where the dread builds slowly, taking over every moment of the film. In Longlegs, the atmosphere plays an essential role. From the very first scene, Perkins creates a world that feels both intimate and oppressive. The pacing is slow, but deliberate. It allows the tension to slowly tighten, gripping the audience as the film advances. By the time the plot takes hold, it refuses to let go. This is a signature Perkins: slow-burning tension, razor-sharp composition, and that ever-present sense of impending doom. Every frame feels purposeful, every shot designed to add another layer to the film's suffocating atmosphere. The performances in Longlegs are unforgettable. Nicolas Cage, playing the twisted, occult-obsessed killer, delivers a chilling, deeply disturbing performance. It's intense, unsettling, and yet hypnotic. His portrayal of this satanic figure isn't subtle, but it works. Cage's presence lingers long after the scene's end, his character representing a dark, unpredictable force at the heart of the film. On the other hand, Maika Monroe brings balance to the chaos. Playing a traumatized FBI agent, her performance is quiet, subtle, but powerful. Every expression conveys depth, pulling the audience deeper into her struggle. She is the emotional core of the film, her battle against both external and internal demons serving as a counterpoint to Cage's raw energy. Alicia Witt and Blair Underwood also deliver noteworthy performances, but it is Cage and Monroe who truly drive the film. Cage's unsettling transformation and Monroe's vulnerability combine to create a contrast that heightens the tension. Cinematography and sound design are critical in Longlegs. Film has the ability to suffocate its audience under a cloud of dread. Every shot feels carefully composed to enhance the tension. The dark, claustrophobic spaces combined with slow, creeping camera movements create a tension of unease that grows throughout the film. The sound design, meanwhile, is subtle but effective. Instead of relying on loud jump scares, the soundtrack plays with eerie whispers, ambient noises, and the deliberate use of silence to build suspense. Together, these elements create a sensory experience that makes the audience feel like they are being pulled deeper into the story's unsettling world. Longlegs isn't just about catching a killer, it's about the trauma left behind. The film weaves themes of control and psychological damage into its narrative. The occult elements aren't just there for show, they symbolize deeper wounds and power struggles within the characters. Maika Monroe's character isn't just hunting a killer, she is also facing her own traumatic past, making the journey as psychological as it's physical. This duality makes the horror feel more profound. It's not just about physical violence, but about the emotional and physical scars that linger long after. The slow unrevealing of both the plot and the characters' psyches keeps the audience on edge, never quite sure what will come next. Longlegs draws comparisons to classics like Silence of the Lambs and Rosemary's Baby. But while it may lean on familiar serial killer thriller tropes, Oz Perkins injects his own style, making the film feel both familiar and fresh. He blends the cold, methodical investigation seen in 19th thrillers with signature creeping dread style, creating a nightmare that's unlikely his. The combination of real-world tension with supernatural and occult themes sets Longlegs apart from the typical thriller. The horror doesn't come from what's happening on the surface, but from the dark, unseen forces that slowly reveal themselves. The conclusion of Longlegs is likely to leave audiences divided. For some, it will feel like a brilliant crescendo, a jaw-dropping masterpiece that perfectly encapsulates the film's themes. For others, it may be frustrating, a slow burn that took too long to ignite. But regardless of one's stance, the ending lingers. It leaves viewers with a visceral, unsettling feeling, a sense that something truly evil has unfolded. While some might criticize the film's pacing, fans of Oz Perkins know that this slow build is intentional. It allows tension to simmer, making the eventual revelations feel both inevitable and devastating. For those who appreciate psychological horror, Longlegs delivers on every level. In conclusion, Longlegs is a masterclass in slow-burn horror. Oz Perkins has crafted a film that taps into deep psychological fears, offering a rich and haunting experience. The deliberate pacing, exceptional performances, especially from Nicolas Cage, and the suffocating atmosphere make this film a standout in 2024. Longlegs isn't for everyone, it demands patience, but for those willing to invest in its slow burn approach, it offers a chilling and unforgettable journey into darkness. It's a film that doesn't just frighten in the moment, it lingers, unsettling viewers long after they have left the theater. For fans of atmospheric, cerebral horror, Longlegs is a must-see. And that wraps up our deep dive into the filmography of Oz Perkins, exploring what makes him both great and yet so underrated. Whether it's the dreamlike dread of the Blackcoat's daughter or the green fairy tale horror of Gretel and Hansel, Perkins has proven himself to be a master of mood and subtle terror. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the world of cinema. And let me know in the comments which Oz Perkins film is your favorite and what do you think sets him apart from the other directors. Thanks for watching, let's talk about films, and until next time, keep exploring the world of film.